At 10:15 on a golden Saturday morning, the courtroom speakers clicked on, and the young man in the navy suit heard his own voice fill the room. "Call my father." Not loud at first, not panicked, worse than that, confident. Then the rest came out in a sharp, drunken rush, the kind of sentence that only makes sense when someone has spent his entire life believing consequences are for other people. "You pull me out of this car, your badge is gone by breakfast." No one moved. Not the bailiff, not the reporters, not the woman in the second row gripping a tissue so tightly her knuckles had gone white. Judge Miriam Holloway didn't look at the screen. She looked at him. Camden Vale, 26 years old, graduate of a private law school he never finished, son of State Senate Majority Leader Daniel Vale, heir to a machine that had controlled contracts, appointments, and police budgets in Halcyon County for almost 15 years. Camden stared down at the defense table like the wood itself might save him. Outside, rain slid down the courthouse windows in long silver lines. Inside, every person in that room understood the same thing at the same time. This was no longer a traffic stop case. It wasn't even just a hit-and-run case. It was the moment a family that had treated a city like inherited property finally heard its own voice played back under oath. And that was only the beginning. Because what happened on Harbor Avenue at 11:47 p.m. on October 18th was ugly enough on its own. A black Range Rover drifting over the line, a cyclist thrown hard against the curb, a young patrol officer making a stop she had every reason to avoid, and no permission, politically speaking, to survive. But what made this case different, what made it spread from one road, to one squad car, to one courtroom, and then through City Hall like fire in dry walls, was the pattern underneath it. This wasn't one reckless night. This was entitlement with a budget. This was a last name used like a weapon. And if you appreciate stories where power finally meets consequence, stay with me, because the damage had been building for years. The public just hadn't heard the tape yet. Officer Elena Ruiz had been on solo patrol for 37 minutes when dispatch pushed out a call from two separate drivers near Harbor and East Mercer. Black SUV, speeding, possible collision. The weather was bad, visibility worse. Ruiz, 29, former Marine Corps MP, 4 years on the force, had just finished writing up a domestic disturbance 2 blocks away when she spotted the Range Rover roll through a blinking red without even pretending to brake. The front right panel was crushed in, the passenger side mirror hung by wiring, and when Camden Vale lowered the window, the first thing Ruiz smelled was whiskey and burned rubber. The second thing she noticed was blood on his cuff. She asked him to step out. He smirked. He asked if she knew who he was. She said yes. Then she asked him again. That was when he reached for his phone and said the line that would later end up on every local station in the state. "Call my father." Ruiz told him to put the phone down. He laughed at her. Not because he thought she was wrong, because he thought she was temporary. Bodycam later showed him leaning back in the driver's seat, rain ticking against the windshield, eyes glassy, saying, "You don't get to do this to me. You work for us." That sentence changed the public mood more than any press conference ever could. Not because it sounded arrogant, because it sounded practiced. Ruiz kept the stop procedural: field sobriety, refusal, medical check, inventory search. And then the detail that should have ended the story right there. Wedged beneath the passenger seat was a bicycle reflector, snapped clean in half, bright red against the black floor mat. That should have been enough. It wasn't. By 1:12 a.m., before the cyclist had even come out of surgery, a captain from headquarters was on scene. By 1:40, Ruiz was told to hand over her body cam for chain review. At 2:05, a deputy city attorney called the precinct asking whether the arrest could be delayed pending identity confirmation, which was absurd because the suspect had identified himself repeatedly and loudly. At 2:21, someone from the mayor's public safety office called the watch commander, and no one would ever admit what was said on that line, but the call logs existed, the timestamps existed, and once federal investigators later aligned them side by side, the shape of the machine became impossible to deny. Meanwhile, 23-year-old Ava Bender lay in St. Catherine's with a fractured pelvis, a collapsed lung, and road rash down the left side of her face. She had been riding home from a late shift at Mercy General, where she worked as a trauma unit technician. The irony was cruel enough to sound written. She spent her nights helping other people survive impact. At 11:47 p.m., she became the impact. Her mother said Ava's first full sentence after surgery wasn't about pain. It was, "Did they catch him?" They had, briefly. By sunrise, Camden Vale had been cited, medically cleared, and moved into a private intake room instead of county holding. By 9 a.m., his attorney, Brent Sloan, was on camera outside the courthouse calling it a regrettable misunderstanding compounded by weather conditions. By noon, anonymous accounts were already pushing a lie online that Ava had been riding without lights. The problem was proof. Or rather, the people protecting Camden believed proof could be managed. They didn't know Officer Ruiz had made a copy request before surrendering her body cam. They didn't know a gas station 2 blocks back had captured the Range Rover clipping a parked sedan 70 seconds before it hit Ava. And they definitely didn't know the cyclist's rear light had a cloud backup feature tied to a fitness app that recorded her exact speed, route, and sudden stop at 11:47:16 p.m. What happened next changed the entire case. A junior evidence tech named Nathan Cole, 31, quiet, meticulous, the kind of man politicians never notice because he doesn't belong to their world, flagged a discrepancy in Camden's vehicle intake sheet. The original notation described moderate right front cosmetic damage, but photographs taken at impound showed tissue residue, paint transfer from a bike frame, and a bent lower grille consistent with pedestrian impact. Someone had tried to downgrade a strike into a scrape. Cole reported it upward. Nothing happened. So he preserved the file off system and took notes. That note, 6 sentences long, would later become one of the most important documents in the case. If cases like this make you think, let me know in the comments, because this is where ordinary corruption stops looking clumsy and starts looking organized. For 11 days, Camden stayed out on bond, wore dark suits, and kept his face expressionless. His father called the arrest an unfortunate family matter. State Senator Daniel Vail never mentioned Ava Bender by name. He did, however, place 3 calls to the police commissioner, 2 to the district attorney's office, and 1 to a donor named Ellis Corman, owner of Vail Infrastructure Partners, a contractor that had received $84 million in county-linked projects over 6 years. Investigators didn't know about the donor call yet. What they did know was that somebody had leaned on the chain of custody. Then a local reporter, Tessa Lind, obtained a fragment of the body cam audio. Just 22 seconds. Enough to hear Camden say, "My father buries people like you in paperwork." That leak detonated the city. Suddenly, old stories came back. Parking citations disappearing. A nightclub assault complaint quietly reclassified as insufficient witness cooperation. A boating incident on Lake Mercer involving alcohol and a dock worker who accepted a confidential settlement. Each case had ended the same way. Camden Vale walked away, irritated, never frightened. The name did the work, but Judge Holloway did not care about the name. That mattered because Holloway, 62, former federal prosecutor, was not impressed by power theater. She ran Courtroom 4B like a machine room, calm, exact, unsentimental. When the defense requested private review of sensitive family communications, she denied it. When they asked to separate the DUI matter from the collision matter, she denied that too. When they suggested Camden's remarks to Ruiz were stress language, she asked, "Is intimidation your client's normal stress response, counsel?" No one laughed. Then the prosecution put on the telematics expert. And the whole case changed. The Range Rover had an onboard system Camden's team either forgot about or assumed could be wiped. It couldn't, not fully. Vehicle speed, brake pressure, steering angle, door openings, paired devices. From 11:44 to 11:47 p.m., the data showed acceleration from 41 to 63 miles per hour on a rain-slick corridor marked for 35. Zero braking in the final 3 seconds before impact. A steering correction 1/2 second late. Then, at 11:47:21, the driver's side phone disconnected. At 11:47:29, the SUV accelerated again. He did not stop to check on her. He did not call 911. He called his father's chief of staff. That one fact stripped the case clean. The prosecutor, Dana Mercer, held up the call records and read the sequence slowly enough for every person in the room to feel the shape of intent. 11:48:03, outgoing call to Nolan Price, Chief of Staff. Duration, 82 seconds. 11:49:41, call from Price to Deputy Commissioner Hale. 11:51:10, call from Hale to Central Watch. 12:03:27, text from Price to Camden. Don't say another word until Brent gets there. The courtroom went silent in a completely different way then. Not suspense, recognition. Because now this wasn't a privileged kid mouthing off during an arrest. This was an active attempt to bend the state around a crime. Camden finally looked up. Judge Holloway asked one question. Mr. Sloan, is the defense still maintaining this was confusion at the scene? Sloan stood, adjusted his jacket, and said the sentence that buried them. Your Honor, my client was disoriented and sought guidance from family. Mercer didn't even stand when she replied. He sought political intervention before emergency aid. That line hung in the room like a verdict before the verdict, and there was still one witness left. Officer Ruiz took the stand on day 4. She didn't dramatize. Good officers usually don't. She described the weather, the lane position, the odor of alcohol, the blood on Camden's cuff. Then Mercer asked what Camden's demeanor had been when she informed him a cyclist had been critically injured. Ruiz paused for exactly 1 second. He asked if there were cameras. Not if she was alive. Not where the ambulance was going. Not whether he had hit someone. He asked if there were cameras. That was when the story stopped being ordinary. By the end of the week, the district attorney added charges. Felony hit and run causing great bodily injury, aggravated DUI, witness intimidation, and conspiracy to obstruct a criminal investigation. A special prosecutor was appointed for the interference angle. Deputy Commissioner Hale resigned. Nolan Price was indicted 31 days later, and Senator Daniel Vail, who had spent a decade telling donors he could protect his people, found himself under ethics inquiry, then federal investigation, then in front of microphones he could no longer control. Camden still thought for a while that money could soften the landing. His team floated rehab, deferred adjudication, private restitution, a statement about youthful error and public scrutiny. Judge Holloway rejected every version of it. At sentencing, Ava Bender walked into court with a cane. That image mattered more than anything Camden's lawyers filed. 23 years old, 3 surgeries, 7 months out of work, numbness still radiating down her left leg. She spoke without raising her voice. Said she used to bike home because it made her feel free after hospital shifts. Said now she flinched whenever headlights approached from behind. Then she looked directly at Camden Vail and said, "You didn't just hit me. You expected the city to help you leave." There are moments when a courtroom stops functioning as a room and becomes a mirror. This was one of them. Judge Holloway folded her hands and delivered the sentence in a voice so measured it made every word heavier. 30 months in state custody, 5 years supervised release, permanent loss of driving privileges pending full review, full restitution for medical costs, lost wages, and long-term rehabilitation, a referral for civil forfeiture review on funds used in the attempted obstruction. And then the line everyone remembered. Mr. Vail, privilege is not wealth. It is the repeated expectation that other people will absorb the cost of your choices. This court cannot undo the life you thought your name purchased, but it can end the protection that name expected here. Camden cried then, briefly, not from remorse, most people thought, from impact. For the first time in his life, the floor did not move for him. His father sat behind him, jaw set, eyes forward. A man discovering too late that power used carelessly teaches the next generation the wrong lesson with terrifying efficiency. Afterward, Halcyon County changed in ways institutions usually resist. Evidence handling moved to an independent digital audit system. Political contact with active investigations became a mandatory disclosure event. 2 commanders retired early. 3 prosecutors recused from donor-linked matters, and every young officer in the department heard the same message passed around in locker rooms and late shifts for months after. Ruiz held the line. That is why this story lasted. Not because a politician's son finally got punished, though he did. Not because the footage was satisfying, though it was. It lasted because it exposed the quiet architecture of exemption, the calls, the favors, the edited forms, the expectation that a wounded stranger would matter less than a powerful man's inconvenience. If you believe no one is above accountability, subscribe, because stories like this do not begin in court. They begin years earlier, in smaller rooms, with smaller escapes, when arrogance gets mistaken for immunity and people decide it is easier to look away. But every system eventually meets a moment it cannot hide from. In this one, it was a rain-dark street, a broken bicycle reflector, a patrol officer who refused to step back, and a judge who understood that sometimes the most important sentence in a courtroom is not the longest one. It is the one that tells a family, a city, and a watching public that the age of automatic forgiveness is over. And when Camden Vale was led through the side door in county khaki instead of tailored blue, he looked smaller than he had on the night he told Officer Ruiz to call his father, because in the end, someone did. And for the first time, it didn't help.